All right, so you want to conquer a mountain, not literally, maybe,
Hmm.
but like those big, hairy challenges life throws your way.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking career goals, relationships, that kind of stuff. Today's deep dive, it's all about finding your inner Alexander the Great.
Ah, interesting.
You've heard the stories, right?
Mm.
This guy conquering the world before he even hit 30.
Right, right.
But we're not just doing a history lesson here. We're going to pull out some surprisingly practical tips from his craziest campaign, the one across the Hindu Kush Mountains. Stuff you can actually use.
Okay, yeah, that's the one. Brutal.
No kidding. We're talking thousands of soldiers, all their gear trying to get over a mountain range that makes Everest look like a walk in the park.
500 miles, peaks hitting almost 20,000 feet. I mean, just wrapping your head around the logistics.
It's insane. Freezing temperatures, avalanches waiting to happen. So how did they even do it? And what can we, sitting here thousands of years later, actually learn from it?
Well, the first thing to realize is that this wasn't just some testosterone-fueled land grab for Alexander. There was a bigger strategy at play.
Right. It wasn't just about planting his flag on top of a mountain. So what was the method behind the uh, mountain climbing madness?
The Hindu Kush. It wasn't the end goal. It was about what lay beyond. Control of the Silk Road, securing the eastern borders of his empire. Those were the real prizes.
So kind of like in our own lives, right? It's easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day grind.
Totally.
But if we can connect those tasks to the bigger picture, our long-term goals, well, that's when things start to click.
100%. It's about understanding your why. Alexander could have tried to bypass the mountains, sure, but it wouldn't have given him that strategic advantage, that foothold he needed.
He wouldn't have achieved his ultimate objective.
Exactly. Sometimes the most direct path to what we want means facing the hard stuff head on.
No shortcuts to success, huh?
Sometimes no. And speaking of facing things head on, another thing that's so fascinating about Alexander is that he didn't just charge into the mountains all gung-ho. This wasn't some reckless adventure.
Right, even with a Y that big, you don't just, like, pack a sandwich and hope for the best.
So this was a meticulously planned operation, right down to the tiniest detail, and the scale of the preparation. Mind-blowing.
Okay, so paint us a picture.
Hmm?
What did that kind of planning actually look like? I mean, we're talking about an army, not a weekend camping trip.
We're talking about an army traversing the Himalayas. Imagine the logistics. First, you've got the routes. Engineers, using what were basically sticks and string back then, figuring out the best paths through these treacherous passes, relying on local guides, hoping they knew what they were talking about.
Talk about pressure. And then, on top of that, you got to feed these people.
Oh, yeah. Thousands of soldiers for weeks, maybe months, in freezing conditions. So you've got quartermasters in charge of amassing these insane stockpiles of food, water, shelter, medical supplies, everything.
It boggles the mind. It's like the mother of all company retreats gone wrong, but 1,000 times more complicated.
Right. And all of that before they even set foot on a mountain path. But here's the thing. All the logistics in the world wouldn't have mattered if Alexander hadn't also prepared his men mentally.
Because when you're staring down a challenge that big, morale's got to be pretty important. So how did he, like, psych up an entire army?
He was a master motivator. He
Yeah.
knew that to get his soldiers to face those kinds of hardships, they needed more than just supplies. They needed a reason, a why, just like we were talking about.
Okay, so what, did they have motivational speakers and togas back then or something?
He was big on reminding his troops of the glory, the riches that awaited them in these new lands. It's like he took this terrifying ordeal and turned it into this ultimate test of their courage, their loyalty, their, what's the word?
Their metal.
Yes. He really got them to buy into the mission, to see themselves as part of something truly extraordinary.
Okay, that makes sense, getting everyone on the same page. But let's be real, talk is cheap, right? It's one thing to tell your team, hey, let's climb a mountain, it'll be great.
Right.
But it's another thing entirely to roll up your own sleeves and actually climb it with them.
Exactly. And that's actually a huge part of what made Alexander such an effective leader. He didn't just command from a position of comfort and safety. He led by example.
He was right there in the thick of it with them.
Oh, yeah. Enduring the same conditions, facing the same dangers, eating the same rations. He wasn't asking them to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself.
Wow. Okay, so you're freezing your butt off, exhausted, probably wondering if you're going to survive. And then you see your leader right there beside you going through the exact same thing.
Powerful, right?
I bet that spoke volumes to his soldiers.
It did. Because when you're facing incredible challenges, people don't blindly follow orders. They look to their leaders for cues on how to behave, how to endure. and what they saw in Alexander. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, to face the same risks, the same discomforts. That's what resonated with them.
Okay, so we've got Alexander, this meticulous planner, inspiring leader, right there in the trenches with his men. It's like the ultimate we're in this together story. But I'm guessing the Hindu Kush didn't exactly roll out the red carpet, even for a leader like Alexander.
You're right, meticulous planning is essential, but it can only take you so far. Even Alexander, with all his foresight, couldn't predict everything Mother Nature had in store.
Because no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, right? And I'm guessing the Hindu Kush was a pretty formidable enemy. So what happened? What kind of curveballs do they have to deal with?
So picture this. You're miles into these mountains, right? The terrain's already treacherous, even on a good day. Then, bam, a blizzard hits.
Oh, man. Talk about bad timing.
This wasn't just any blizzard. We're talking the kind of blinding snowstorm that brings everything to a standstill.
I bet. Suddenly those carefully mapped out passes are
Gone. Completely impassable, choked with snow and ice. And to make matters even worse,
the avalanches start.
oh yeah, the threat of being buried alive becomes a constant fear. And on top of all that, they're running out of supplies.
No. It's like the universe just decided to throw everything it had at them. I mean, can you imagine? You've come this far, you've planned, you've pushed yourself to the limit, and suddenly it's like, what's the point? It's all over.
It's the ultimate test of leadership, of resilience. And this is where Alexander's true genius shines through, because any general could lead an army in good times, right? But it's how you respond to those moments of utter chaos, those moments when everything seems lost. That's what separates the good from the great.
So what did he do? Did he just like throw up his hands and say, well, guys, it was a good run?
He adapted. He could have easily clung to the original plan, refused to deviate, but he understood that sometimes the best course of action is the one you least expect.
So instead of clinging to a plan that's clearly not working,
He becomes a master of the pivot. He looks at the situation, acknowledges that the old map is useless, and says, okay, time to draw a new one.
Okay, I love that. But how do you pivot when you're leading an army through the Himalayas in the middle of a blizzard? It's not like you could pull up Google Maps and find an alternate route.
This was adaptability at its finest. First, he divides the army into smaller, more agile groups. This allowed them to navigate the treacherous terrain more efficiently, lessen the strain on their dwindling resources.
Okay, so kind of like breaking down a big problem into smaller, more manageable chunks. We hear that in business all the time, right?
Exactly. But he didn't stop there. Alexander, he dispatches his best scouts, orders them to find alternate routes, paths less affected by the blizzards. At the same time, he's telling his men, we need to find food, anything we can get our hands on.
Wow, talk about resourcefulness.
Right. It's about sending a very clear message. Giving up, yeah, it's an option, but it's not the only option. We have to keep moving, keep searching for solutions. And those small victories, finding a new path, securing a source of food, they become more than just logistical wins. They're psychological boosts. They remind everyone that they're not beaten yet.
It's like in our own lives, right? When we're facing a setback, sometimes those small wins, they're the things that keep us going.
Absolutely. It's about shifting your perspective, focusing on what you can control, even when everything feels completely out of control.
This whole situation, it really is a masterclass in adaptability, isn't it? It's like that quote, the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. Alexander, he didn't see changing plans as a failure. He saw it as a necessity.
And it's a skill that's just as relevant today as it was back then. Think about it. The world's changing faster than ever, right?
Yeah.
Technology, the economy, the political landscape. If we're going to thrive in this kind of environment, we need to be able to adapt, to pivot on a dime when we have to.
It's about having the courage to redraw the map, even when the old one was so carefully crafted, so familiar. It's about recognizing that clinging to something that's clearly not working, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So after all that, after the blizzards, the dwindling supplies, the sheer exhaustion, we've got Alexander and his army battered but not broken, finally emerging from those mountains. Talk about a we made it moment.
It wasn't just relief, it was a triumph. They didn't just survive the Hindu Kush, they conquered it. And in doing so, they proved that even the most impossible seeming challenges, they're not insurmountable. It's a story that's still inspiring, what, like 2,000 years later?
It really is incredible. But Okay, let's be real. Most of us aren't Alexander the Great. We're not out here trying to conquer empires or cross mountain ranges with thousands of people. So how do we actually apply these, let's face it, kind of grand historical lessons to our own lives?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Those principles that got Alexander through that craziness. Strategic thinking, preparation, leadership, that shared hardship, and just plain old stick-with-itness. Those are universal.
I love that. So let's break it down, make it relevant for everyone listening, no matter what mountains they're facing. We talked about strategic thinking, that clear why. What does that look like practically outside of a military campaign?
Well, it starts with figuring out your non-negotiables. What are the challenges you absolutely cannot avoid if you want to achieve your goals? I mean, it could be anything, starting a business, writing a book, even just being a better parent. What's your own personal Hindu Kush? What are those obstacles that are standing directly between you and what you want?
I love that. Identifying your own Hindu Kush. So once you know what you're up against, that's where the preparation comes in,
Right.
right? We talked about how meticulously Alexander planned everything. And even though those plans got totally thrown out the window with that blizzard, it was still crucial, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Without those supplies they stockpiled, without scouting those routes, being on top of logistics, their chances of making it out of there were slim to none. So it's about asking yourself, am I truly prepared for what's ahead? Do I have the resources, the skills, the support system I need?
And we're not just talking about, like, spreadsheets and to-do lists here. We also talked about how Alexander prepared his men mentally. They needed that why to keep them going.
Absolutely. They had to believe that the hardships they were facing, that there was a point to it all, that something good was waiting on the other side. And it's the same for us today. It's not enough to just set goals. You've got to connect with that deeper why. Why are these goals important? What will achieving them allow you to do, to be? How will your life be better?
Because when those moments of doubt creep in, and trust me, they always do, having that strong sense of purpose can be everything. But even with a good plan and your heart in the right place, you still need the right kind of leadership to navigate the unexpected. And that's where Alexander's example really resonates, I think.
100%. Leading from the front lines, facing those hardships head on, showing your people you're not giving up. That wasn't just strategy for Alexander, it was who he was.
And that, I think, is such an important lesson for anyone who's in any kind of leadership position, whether you're running a company, coaching a team, or, like you said, even just raising a family. People don't follow words, they follow actions.
They want to see that you're in it with them, not just directing traffic from the sidelines.
Exactly. And then there's that adaptability piece. Because no matter how much you prepare, life's going to throw curveballs. And when that happens, like with that blizzard in the Hindu Kush, you got to be able to adapt to change course.
Yep. And that takes guts. It's not easy to let go of that plan, even when it's clearly not working anymore. But sometimes being able to say, okay, this isn't working, we need a new approach, that's the smartest, bravest thing you can do.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change. And finally, the big one, the lesson that kind of ties it all together, persistence. Because Alexander's journey, it was brutal. Weeks of hardships, setbacks, every reason in the world to just turn back and go home.
But they didn't. They stuck with it. They kept moving even when it felt impossible. And that's, I think, often the difference between the people who achieve their big, crazy dreams and the people who don't.
It's about embracing the long game, knowing that anything worthwhile, it's going to take effort. It's going to be hard. There are going to be times when you want to quit.
But those are the moments when you dig deep, remind yourself of your why, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Because the view from the summit, always worth the climb. So there you have it, listeners. Alexander the Great and his adventure across the Hindu Kush. It's not just some dusty old story. It's like this masterclass in how to tackle any challenge life throws your way.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that we all have that strength within us, that potential for resilience, for leadership, for just plain old never give upness. We might not all be conquerors in the historical sense.
But we can all conquer our own mountains, whatever those might be. So next time you're facing your own Hindu Kush, remember what we talked about today. Get clear on your objective. Prepare like your life depends on it. Lead with authenticity. Be ready to adapt. And never, ever, ever give up.
And who knows, maybe you'll be the one inspiring people with your story a couple thousand years from now.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic. And as always, tons of practical takeaways you can use. Until then, stay curious and keep climbing.